taught me anything, it's that never trust a person you've met on a train. The 40s brought us a number of femme fatales hell-bent on getting what they want. In 1945, Leave Her to Heaven introduced us to socialite Ellen Barrett, whose obsessive nature leads to tragedy. Whether or not you consider Leave Her to Heaven a film noir or not, there is no denying that the film has many elements that liken it to the style. To many, it's a noir in technicolor and a psychological melodrama that plays on our sympathies. Like Richard Harland, we too become enchanted by Ellen Barrett and pulled into her web of obsession, manipulation, and deceit. Thank you for joining me today on the Quiet Riot. If you are new here, this is where we talk film, television, and media. I'm Ainsley, and today we are discussing psychological drama film noir thriller starring Jean Tierney. A commercial and critical success upon its release, Leave Her to Heaven has cultivated a cult following. Shot in Technicolor, the film looks like a painting come to life. Behind that beauty, there is something far more sinister. Adapted from the book of the same name by Ben Ames Williams, Leave Her to Heaven was 20th Century Fox's highest-earning film of the 40s, bringing in $8 million. The film blurs genres, managing to balance the melodrama with a psychological thriller, as the audience worry for Ellen and hope that Richard and her cousin, Ruth, make it out alive. The subject of film criticism since its 1945 release, many appear to agree and disagree with the film's status as a film noir. I'm on the fence myself, preferring to refer to it as a thriller with elements of the style. This is mainly due to the nature of the film being shot in flashback and the main plot dealing with the relationship of Ellen pulling Richard into her web. Some seem to think that Ellen is not a femme fatale because she doesn't get Richard to go against his own interests or break the law. I disagree with this because a femme fatale can exist outside of film noir, and a femme fatale doesn't have to get the man to act against his own interest. She does, however, lure him into a dangerous situation. And the reality here when we come to the end is that yes, Richard did technically break the law. He didn't really do it for her, but he did it because he thought that no one would believe him. And unfortunately, the law doesn't care about that. While the majority of femme fatales are motivated by financial wealth, Ellen is motivated by her pathological obsessive need to love and be loved. Anything that takes the love away from her is a threat to her and she must destroy it. Think of the femme fatale as a woman who uses a man to get what she needs. Don't think of her as a woman who simply needs money. That need could be anything, and for Ellen, it's love and blind devotion. A stunning socialite who, in her mother's words, loved too much, Ellen Barrett is prone to jealousy. When we are first introduced to Ellen, she is on a train headed to New Mexico reading a book by author Richard Harland, who is sitting opposite her on the train car. She is unaware of him being the author, but is soon taken in when she recognizes his resemblance to her father. The pair engage in flirtations before getting off at their stop and finding out that they will be staying in the same place. She continues to engage in flirtations with Richard as she mourns the death of her father. Those that know Ellen, her mother, and Ruth in particular, are aware of her obsessive nature. There are many moments that allude to Ellen's tendency to possess what she loves dearly. We learn early that Ellen was close with her father, and things soon begin to appear that Ellen saw her own mother as competition for her father's love. With her father no longer around, Ellen needs somewhere else to put her love. When she meets and falls for Richard, she has found the place to put it. Ellen is a beautiful woman with piercing blue eyes and an enchanting stare. Beneath the surface, Ellen isn't as pretty as she seems. She puts on a good show, but soon after the marriage, the cracks start to show. Her referring to Richard's brother as a cripple as she attempts to get the doctor to say he shouldn't go to the cabin with them. Her frustration with the surprise of her mother and Ruth arriving at the cabin. While Ellen's desire to spend some quality time alone with her husband is reasonable, the way that she acts is not. She has expectations that far extend normalcy. Everyone around Ellen is her rival for the love and the attention of Richard. This leads to resentment, detest, and for some, death. While Ellen doesn't seem to fully plan her worst acts except her final act of revenge against her greatest rival, Ruth, Ellen always has a trick up her sleeve. Her whole life, Ellen has seen others as her love rivals, beginning with her mother and sister for the love of her father. Even though we never get to meet her father, we get to know more about their relationships thanks to Mrs. Barrett and Ellen's own words. Her love is obsessive and possessive. Her love is deadly. Instead of spending the majority of our time with Richard, we actually spend the majority of our time with Ellen getting to know her. We know that she wants to make her husband happy, but she also wants to have him all to herself. And when we learn more about her relationship with her father, we recognize that her relationship with him was also smothering. She was the one smothering her father. And now that her father is no longer with her, when she met Richard on the plane and he resembled her father, she knew that she had to have him. Where Ellen's love is obsessive and possessive, Ruth's love is permissive and apathetic. Where Ellen's love is selfish, Ruth's is selfless. Though biologically her niece, Ruth is close with her adoptive mother. She refers to her as mother and only being adopted by her and not her mother's husband. Imagine if she was to refer to Ellen's father as hers. Ruth did what she had to do to be safe around Ellen, and she continues to do so throughout the film. When Ruth and Richard are first introduced to each other, and they end up having their first conversation, just the two of them, he is a bit shocked by the way she words her relationships to her parents, because she only refers to Mrs. Barrett as being the one who adopted her. And Richard is obviously surprised by the way she said this, but he doesn't say anything at this point, and he only mentions it again later. And Ruth doesn't really think too much of it, and a big part of me thinks that she's constantly lived her life in survival mode, and when you get to know Mrs. Barrett a lot more as well, you find that she has really done the same. While Ellen placed Ruth in the role as her romantic rival for Richard, Ellen's first romantic rival was arguably her own mother. There is nothing to suggest that Ellen's relationship with her father was anything more than that of a father and daughter. What we do know for sure is that her attachment to her dad was unhealthy, and she mimics that in her relationship with Richard. At times, Mrs. Barrett looks scared of her own daughter, most likely because she knows the worst of her. It also seems that she blames her husband's death on Ellen. I don't even think that she looks at Ellen as a daughter in the same way she does Ruth. I don't think Ellen looks at Mrs. Barrett as her mother. For her, it was her father and her against the world. Richard wishes to dedicate his forthcoming novel to his mother-in-law, who warns him against it. If only he had listened to this advice. When the book is published and arrives in the house, Ellen opens it to find the book has been dedicated to the girl with the hoe, Ruth. And prior to this, we already saw that she was beginning to suspect something was going on between Richard and Ruth. And while there was definitely a attraction there in the sense of, I think, a really strong friendship, and I do believe that there were things that Richard saw in her that he no longer saw in Ellen, especially as he got to know more of who Helen was. His son had died, and then they end up going there, and just these little like red flags, and they're not even little red flags, they're pretty big red flags. And he should have known that maybe dedicating this book to Ruth, not a good idea. While it's great that Richard appreciates his friendship with Ruth and the help she offered him on his book, he should have dedicated the book to Ellen just to appease her. Now, I'm not saying that you should always appease your abuser or somebody who treats you badly in any way, but in this case, it's not just about Richard's own survival, it's also about Ruth's survival. At this point, he's already suspicious of her behavior, and Mrs. Barrett has been honest with him about her daughter. Upset with what she has perceived as her husband being unfaithful with her own sister, Ellen has a plan to destroy Ruth. She does so by framing her for her murder. This is the most planning that we've seen Ellen do. Her murder of Danny and orchestrating the fall that led to her miscarriage were calculating, but there's a lot more planning in framing someone for your own murder. Ellen poisons sugar with arsenic that she drinks with her tea at a picnic with her mother and sister. She writes a letter to Russell Quinton, who she knows still loves her, implicating Ruth in her murder. When she becomes sick, Richard comes to her bedside and she asks him to be cremated and to have her ashes spread where her father's were. In her will, she says that she wants to be buried in the family tomb, making it look like Ruth had her cremated to cover up her poisoning. While Ellen has already proved herself to be truly an awful person, Ellen's final act drives that home. So jealous and obsessive, Ellen rather die than allow Richard to move on. It is my opinion that Richard and Ruth did not engage in any type of romantic or otherwise relationship prior to Ellen's death, and in actuality, she's the one that pushed them together. Ruth does confess to being in love with Richard, and I believe that she is, but I do think that the love she feels for Richard was born out of her desire to give him the love that her sister could not, a love that both Richard and her deserve. While Ruth was found not guilty in the murder of Ellen, Richard was sentenced to 2 years in prison for keeping the fact that Ellen killed Danny a secret. He didn't say anything out of fear he wouldn't be believed, but the law doesn't really care about that. At the start of the film, we witness him return home, and by the end of the film, he comes home to Ruth. Both are free from Ellen's manipulations. Leave Her to Heaven is one of my top 10 films. I really don't make a list, so I probably shouldn't say that. But it's one of my favorite films. It's one of those movies that I could watch over and over again. There's so much to take from it. And the character of Ellen is such a great antagonist. She's such an incredibly executed villain, and I haven't read the book that this film is based on, so I can't really compare it to the book in any way. But the way that it was adapted to screen, the direction and cinematography, the casting of Jean Tierney and the others around her, the wardrobe, all of it made not only the film itself really great, but also made the villain, the antagonist that is Ellen Berendt, something to behold. She's quite a complex character. She's not this purely evil human being, though she is incredibly awful. She's willing to kill her own self in order to frame her sister for what she perceived was her stealing her husband away from her, when in reality it's everything Ruth did up until that point of him leaving her that pushed him away. She even ended up confessing to him that she killed his own brother and that she was responsible for her own miscarriage. One of the things that's so great about this villain is it doesn't give off the air of, oh, this is a villain that's been written by a man. It has been written by a man, yes, both in book form and brought to screen, but more than that, it's a villain that was crafted that just so happens to be a woman, as opposed to some villains that we see. They're women written by men, and some things you can tell more than others. For the character of Ellen, she is and appreciated, and that's something that she definitely does. Christmas Day was an inauspicious moment to bring in a moody, morbid film which is all about a selfish, jealous, and deceitful dame. Somehow, this hardly seems the season for indulging in that sort of thing. Yet, such is the unpleasant topic which is pursued in exhausting length in the 20th Century Fox's Leave Her to Heaven, which came to the Roxy yesterday. The fact is, however, that this picture would be little more congenial at any time, for it is plainly a piece of cheap fiction done up in Technicolor and expensive sets. Assuming that there are such women as the one Jean Tierney plays in the film, a thoroughly honoring creature who is so jealous of her author husband's love that she permits his adored younger brother to drown, kills her own unborn child, and finally destroys herself by trickery when she finds that her husband and her sister are in love. The description of such in this picture is far from skillful or acute. It doesn't need to be. And the whole plot, especially a courtroom climax, is arbitrary, artificial, and vain. Miss Tierney's petulant performance of this vixenish character is about as analytical as a piece of pinup poster art. It is strictly one-dimensional in the manner of a dot on an I, and Cornell Wilde is equally restricted as her curiously overpowered spouse. Jeanne Crane is colorless and wooden as the sister with whom he eventually finds bliss, and Vincent Price, Mary Phillips, and Darrell Hickman mechanically play other roles. Only the sets are intriguing, being elaborate and gadgety. I got this from a review. There was reviews for all of the things that had come out that day, and that's the extent of his review. That's the whole entire thing. And you could just tell that this is, one, it's not the type of film that he likes, and I hesitate to say that what he's saying here sounds completely sexist, but it just seems like someone who isn't very interested in seeing a female antagonist, a female villain, and I don't really know how he feels about a female protagonist, if she is the one that takes up most of the screen time or is put in front, and that's just conjecture. That's just me saying what pops into my head when I read this, but a lot of what he's saying is honestly the things that make this film stand out, even from a 21st century 1924 day. The way in which Jean Tierney carries herself almost as if she's dressing up and playing a woman. She is a child who hasn't really learned how to go out in the world and take it on, but she's playing this role. And when she gets into her marriage, it's very much like playing that role all over again. And it seems as if she played that role with her father, like she wanted to take over her mother's role. And that's just me having this idea of what came before the movie started, before her father's death. But the way that there's so much more complexities to this villain, and especially at this time, I don't think that specific audience members would take too kindly to seeing a female villain that is so in control and possessive. She's not in control of her own feelings, but she is in control of how she handles them. And I don't know, I just don't think that this person should be watching anything with any type of female villain. Or Len G. Shaw of the Detroit Free Press had better things to say about the film. In another of those exceptional dramas with which Hollywood has been providing us in recent times, if it lacks the cheeriness traditionally associated with the holiday season, it is a psychological study very much of the grim side and gripping in its very manifestation as it traces with no mitigating detours the coarse wife whose mad jealousy leaves only disaster in its wake. Accentuating the story is acting a quality one is seldom permitted to observe. Jean Tierney plays the subtly psychopathic wife whose insane determination to completely dominate the love and interests of her husband. Now, that's a good little review. I put the entirety of the review in the description box below, and I will have other reviews and resources down there as well. But that is a lot more how I feel about this movie. Is this just this great psychological tale of this person who has this really insane determination to possess her husband and to possess those that she loves, and it's the person at the time, and for her now it's Richard. And that review gets it, where I think the review before it just didn't seem to get it. Like, and if it's not your thing to watch this kind of film, that's totally okay, but I just don't think that his review grasped on to the reality of what this film was really about and what it was trying to say. Wanda Hayes' review in the Daily News. As Ellen, Miss Tierney is as sweet as honey one minute and the next minute vicious. Vicious enough to kill. Be great acting, but she manages to ride the impression that it is a good performance. And exquisitely dressed in stunning technicolor, she is much more beautiful than most of the movie girls who have portrayed dangerous women. I'm not a really big fan of the interview and what they have to say about Gene Tierney here, because I personally think Gene Tierney is a good actress, and I think that a lot of her choices in this movie added to the character that Ellen and the person that Ellen is. As I had said prior, she seems very much like a kid or just a much younger person playing an adult, and she really doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know how to go about that, and she does a really good job here. So I mean, maybe I'm the one that's in like her impression, like she's giving the impression of a good performance, so maybe I fell for that. But I think her performance is great here, and I think that her performance and the way that she acts off of Jeanne Crane and the way that she acts off Cornell Wilde and everyone else adds something a little extra. And there's the specific scene with Danny that is definitely the most memorable scene. And when she's just sitting there, she's so cold. And she's, if anything, is more so like, not that she's enjoying this, but that she wants it to be over. Because does she want to murder him? No. But she feels like this is what she has to do. And that comes off in her performance, in Gene Tierney's performance. Leave Her to Heaven is a well-made thriller that focuses on the melodrama of daily life with someone you can't trust. For Ellen's family, it's like walking on pins and needles, trying not to upset her. For Richard, it is slowly finding out that the woman he married is not who he thought she was. There are manipulations followed by murder and more manipulations. There is obsession in every glare from Ellen, who takes understandable desires and turns them into anything but. Gene Tierney's portrayal of Ellen makes it easy for us to understand why Richard would fall for her, but we are still left wondering why he ignored those red flags. But we also understand why he did. In discussions about Leave Her to Heaven, we typically use words like obsession, jealousy, and manipulation, all words to describe Ellen and the story at hand. There was one word, however, that isn't typically used but should be, and that word is abuse. Ellen's an abusive person to her husband and others around her. She manipulates things behind Richard's back in order to get her way. We learn of her actions towards Ruth when they were children and see the effects that those actions had on Ruth. We also see the fear and discomfort in her mother's actions. Her final act of suicide is to ruin her sister's life by framing her for her murder. Till the end, she was being an abusive person that needs control to get and maintain the life that she believes she deserves. From the immaculate wardrobe to the beautiful cinematography by Leon Shamroy that captures the stunning beauty of the location shots, Leave Her to Heaven proves that for some, beauty is only skin deep. For Ellen, this is definitely true. James B. Clark's editing and Alfred Newman's music are a cherry on top of the deliciously colorful sundae of talented direction, performances, and a script that highlights Ellen's true nature as her mask begins to slip. The most memorable and arguably best scene in the film features the drowning of Danny as Ellen looks on in her white clothes and black sunglasses. In this moment, she becomes the most vile femme fatale of them all. Between scenes of her glaring at the drowning Danny to Danny splashing in the water before being completely submerged in the lake that was once a beautiful place turns into Richard's worst nightmare. All this because he didn't want to go and stay with her mother and sister before they left. Here, because when someone's in white clothing, especially at this time, it was meant to represent innocence and purity. Is not that. She's not an innocent person. She's not a pure person. And so her wearing this, because Ellen's not an innocent person, she's not a pure person, whatever that means. And when you see her sitting there and she's wearing all her white, it's just a interesting juxtaposition, or like an interesting contrast between the darkness that's inside of her and the clothes that she wears. And the clothes that she wears a lot of white in this movie, and she wears a lot of clothes that would make her seem a lot more innocent. And I mean, this is film, so the clothes would definitely are supposed to mean something a little more. Before he's going out to, and it's just an interesting contrast between what's going on behind those glasses, and it's really like this cover, and it's interesting. Like the glasses are meant to signify, in my eyes, her true nature, where what she is wearing is her covering up that nature. The choice to film Leave Her to Heaven in color was smart because it made the juxtaposition between Ellen's outer beauty and her inner ugliness far more pronounced. We also got to see the beauty in all its glory. After watching Leave Her to Heaven the last time, I understand why the film is often labeled a film noir. This is something that I didn't really think much of until quite recently when I was doing some more research on the film. It goes beyond some of the more obvious reasons, like the film being told in flashback. And the film uses the light and color around Ellen in the same way that most film noirs tend to use shadow and then in turn use light as well. As we've seen in other noirs such as The Third Man, light is just as important as shadow. What we don't see is her eyes that are covered as she watches Danny struggle. This is Ellen stepping into the light. There is no more mystery. We know exactly who she is. One of the things that makes Leave Her to Heaven such a good film is that it makes you think, and it certainly makes me think. I'm constantly, in these past couple weeks, have been thinking the character of Ellen Barrett and what everything around her represents, what she's doing and what she's wearing and what that represents at the time. There's a scene where she is wearing a pair of jeans and a button-down plaid shirt tucked into them, and her hair's pulled back. And this is her really trying to play like the country girl or cabin girl housewife. And when you see the different things that she's wearing and the different ways in which she acts, she's very much she's an actor. She's putting on airs, she's playing a role because she wants to do whatever she can to please her husband, but she does so in a way that essentially just ends up pushing him away. And she can't seem to understand why. And in the moment where he comes home after she's opened his book, and he's obviously been dealing with something. I think he's been thinking very much about the loss of Danny and the loss of his unborn child and what that means, and a lot of what he had been believing about Ellen from beginning to more recently is all coming to a head, and he's no longer able to just play the part. Like he wants to be a good husband, but he cannot be that for Ellen. He can't be the husband that Ellen wants because no one can. And I enjoy, this is one of those films that I can enjoy for every aspect and kind of like pull apart, really try to, see how I perceive different things, and I'm continuously entertained by it every time that I watch it. And a lot of that is in the character of Ellen Barrett and the performance of Gene Tierney, who brings it alive, and just seeing how her relationship with Richard and her relationship with all those around her tend to dissolve, because none of this is about evolving. All of this is about things devolving from the initial meeting or the first time that we see her with specific people. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch and or listen to this video. I really do appreciate it. I want to say a special shout out, thank you to any new subscribers. If this is your first time watching a video by me, I hope you decide to subscribe. If you like this video, be sure to give it a like and comment below with your thoughts on the film if you've seen it, and comment below with anything you'd like to see on this channel in the future. I will see you next time, and bye!